A mugger breaks into a woman's home and tackles her. The woman tries to call the police, but it's too late. The assailant takes control of her and slaps her across the face. The woman was left defenseless and attacked. After the assailant leaves, the woman does not choose to call the police but calmly cleans up the broken dishes on the floor. She then went to the bathroom to take a shower. The next day, she went to the hospital alone to be checked for HIV, but refused the doctor's offer of blocking pills. Then she changed the locks on her house and went to the shop to buy pepper spray. At night she sleeps with a hammer in her arms. Even when her son asked her about the cut on her face, she said she had fallen on her bike. Independent in nature, Leah is the owner of a gaming company. She is perceived as cold and unemotional by her employees. She tries to get her life back to normal as if nothing had ever happened. But that day, black-clad thugs break into her home again, hurting her for no reason at all. But this time Leah doesn't choose to call the police, and even tells her friends at a dinner party that she was assaulted by a stranger in her home in a relaxed manner. Her friends urged her to call the police, but Leah didn't feel the need to do so. Her distrust of the police and journalists was all over her, and it all started when she was 11 years old. Her religious father had gone mad and killed 27 people in quick succession. When the police and journalists arrived, Leah was burning evidence with her father. The evidence was so overwhelming that her father was caught red-handed and sentenced to life in prison. But the nightmare didn't end there for Leah. The photo of the little girl who helped her demon father destroy evidence is still being discussed. Even now that she is the owner of her company, she still has people dumping rubbish on her as she sits in the restaurant, cursing her viciously before leaving. And all this stranger hate is something Leah is used to. The shadows of her childhood had made her not trust anyone so easily and had given her this independent nature. So Leah decided to catch the black-clad thugs on her own. Leah was still working late at night at the office when a sudden message on her phone made her feel scared. A message from a stranger who even knows the color of the clothes she's wearing. She suspected that someone was watching her in real time, so she gets up and takes a look around the office, where she finds that only the photographer is still working. The photographer had never been on good terms with Leah, and Leah suspected that this man was the black-clad thug. But she had no real evidence, so she had to give up for the time being to keep him from finding out. But as she walks home, she realizes that someone is following her. This woman is being followed. Instead of hiding in the house, she goes around the back of the car, smashes the glass and sprays mace into the woman's eyes before she can see him. The familiar screams made Leah freeze. But the man who had been following her was her ex-husband. A few days earlier, her ex-husband Kevin had heard her being assaulted at the dinner table. He feared for her safety, so he made a point of watching the neighborhood for anyone suspicious to appear. Only he didn't expect that he would be turned into a mugger by Lydia instead. He thought that was the end of the drama. But to his surprise, the next day, a malicious video of Leah appeared on the company's computer. This reinforced Leah's belief that the photographer had done it. Only someone from the company could have easily planted the virus on the computer. So she approaches Paul, the programmer, and asks him to help her find the suspect in the dark. But the results are surprising. In the evening, Leah arrives at Paul's computer desk and discovers that the source of the spoof video is none other than the good Paul. Paul has to argue that he didn't do it, but that the photographer did the spreading of the video. Leah doesn't get angry at Paul's sophomoric explanation, but tells him to take off his trousers. Leah found out that he wasn't the one who had assaulted her and left. By the time she drove home, she found a crowd of people at the door. Mr. and Mrs. George rushed to inform her of the situation, and it turns out that George has found a burglar trying to sneak into her house who has been chased away by George. George wanted to accompany Leah into the house to see what was going on. He looked around the house, found nothing unusual, and was ready to leave. Before he left, he told Leah to call him if there was any trouble. The warmth of George's gesture made Leah fall in love with him. She began to follow George's movements, watching his life through binoculars at the window. She was looking forward to seeing him again and was desperate to have more contact with him. Soon it was Christmas. Leah, who had always been reluctant to ask for help, came to George's house and invited them to a Christmas party. And the seating arrangement is clever, with George sitting next to Leah. The woman, in an attempt to attract the man's attention, sneaks her leg under the table and touches him, and the man doesn't resist. He can't help but look at the woman in front of him, who he has actually had feelings for a long time too. The party ended with a flirtation between the two of them. When Leah returned home again, she found that someone else had been in the room. The unidentified liquid on the sheets and the profanity on the computer make Leah furious. She rips the sheets off the bed, but doesn't call the police about the apparent break-in. In the evening, There is a sudden gust of wind outside and George arrives unexpectedly. He is worried about Leah's safety and comes to the house to see if she needs help. The wind suddenly becomes stronger and the window has to be closed by two people. A flirtatious position leads to feelings that should not be there. Leah leaned into George's arms, but George didn't want to go on. He fled without saying a word, leaving Leah alone. That day, the masked thug comes to the door again, ready to assault Leah again. Leah felt the scissors that had fallen to the ground and stabbed the man's hand and ripped off his mask. To her surprise, the man in black was the same George who had captivated her. She held the scissors up to keep George away and drove him out. But Leah still didn't call the police. By the time she got to work the next day, a feral cat pounced on her and caused an accident. She was stuck in the car and couldn't move. She tried to call her friends for help but couldn't get through to them. She had to call George, who came over quickly. He took Leah home gently and bandaged her wounds carefully. Leah didn't tell him off. The next day Leah and her son were shopping in the supermarket when they met George alone again. They met up for dinner and her son got drunk. At this point George suddenly invited Leah to the basement with him. At this point, George is no longer hiding the fact that he is a sadist and that only violence can make him feel good. With that, he pushes Leah to the ground and prepares to commit another crime. And Leah looks at him in a very cooperative manner. This was a turnoff for George, as it wasn't what he wanted. Instead of blaming him, Leah played a game of chase and run with George. George put on his mask and broke into Leah's house again, and Leah fled in a panic. As George pins Leah down and prepares to assault her, Leah's son appears. When he saw his mother being bullied, his son grabbed a tool and knocked George out from behind. At this point George took off his mask and stared at Leah in shock. Seeing the smile on Leah's lips, he realized he had been tricked. It turns out that Leah had set this up, pretending to be submissive before allowing her son to kill George. When the police arrived, Leah hid the fact that she had been assaulted several times before. Her son had acted in self-defense and the police had to acquit him. It's all over and Leah has finally got her revenge.